My name is Sadie Brooks, and I'm 32. Sitting at my childhood dining table in Chicago, I felt my world crack. Dad's voice was cold, announcing I'd get nothing from the family trust. His words hit like a slap, my stepmom's smirk burning worse. The chandelier flickered, casting jagged shadows as my hands shook. Was this the family I'd trusted? Then my phone buzzed, a call that changed everything. Have you ever been blindsided by those closest to you? Like and subscribe if you felt that sting, and share where you're watching from. My chest tightened as Dad's words lingered in the air, sharp as the winter wind outside our Chicago home. I stared at the oak table, Mom's old china gleaming under the soft glow of candles. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in with every shallow breath I took. I glanced at Nathan, my older brother, hoping for a flicker of support. His eyes stayed fixed on his plate fork scraping against porcelain, a sound that grated against my nerves. He wouldn't look at me. Lorraine. My stepmom leaned back in her chair, her gold bracelet catching the light as she sipped her wine. The clink of it against her glass felt deliberate, like she was marking her territory. She'd been in our lives for 8 years, but her presence still felt like an intrusion, a wedge driven between Dad and me. I wanted to speak, to demand why Dad thought I deserved nothing, but my throat burned words, trapped behind a wall of shock. I pushed my mind back, searching for something to anchor me. I was 16 again, sitting cross-legged on the worn rug in Dad's study. The room smelled of leather and coffee, his law books stacked high on oak shelves. He'd been up late preparing for a big case, and I'd stayed to help sorting his notes under the glow of a brass lamp. "You're sharp, Sadie," he'd said, his voice warm, eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'll always make sure you're taken care of." That promise had felt like a vow etched into my heart as I handed him a neatly organized stack of papers. I'd believed him, then believed in the Dad who saw my potential, who made me feel like I could be anything. Now that memory felt like a cruel joke. I blinked back to the present, my hands gripping the edge of my chair. Dad sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable, like he'd already moved on from crushing me. I don't know what I expected, maybe an explanation, a hint of regret, but he just adjusted his glasses and reached for the mashed potatoes as if he hadn't just torn away the security he'd promised me all those years ago. Nathan finally shifted his chair, creaking. I thought he might speak, might call Dad out, but he only cleared his throat and muttered something about the food being good. My stomach twisted. Nathan, who'd always been my ally growing up, who'd snuck me extra cookies when Mom wasn't looking, was abandoning me now. His silence stung worse than Lorraine's smugness. Was he in on this? Had he known Dad was planning to cut me out? I forced myself to look at the mantel across the room, where a faded photo sat in a silver frame. It was me and Dad at my high school graduation, my cap slightly crooked, his arm around my shoulders. We were laughing, the sun bright behind us. That day, he'd told me he was proud that I'd go far. The photo mocked me now, a snapshot of a bond I wasn't sure ever existed. Had he been lying even then, or had something changed in him since Mom died? Lorraine set her glass down, the sound pulling me back. She tilted her head, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know, Sadie," she said, her voice syrupy, "maybe this is for the best. You've always been so independent. I'm sure you'll figure something out." Her words were a knife cloaked in false concern. Independent. She meant reckless, foolish, chasing a tech startup that she and Dad had never taken seriously. I wanted to snap back to tell her my company wasn't just a hobby, that I'd already secured seed funding, that I was close to something big. But the weight of Dad's decision pressed down, stealing my fire. Marcus, my husband, sat beside me, his hand resting on my knee under the table. His touch was steady, grounding, but even that couldn't dull the ache. I caught Clara's eye, my younger sister, hoping for some shred of solidarity. She was slouched in her chair, scrolling on her phone, her face blank. She hadn't said a word all night, her detachment a quiet betrayal of its own. Did she even care? Or had Lorraine's influence turned her against me too? I pushed my plate away, the smell of roasted chicken suddenly nauseating. I needed to understand, needed to know why Dad thought I was unworthy. Was it really about my startup? Or was there something deeper? Something I'd missed? The question burned, but asking it felt like stepping into a trap. Still, I opened my mouth, my voice shaky but determined. Dad, I started. Why are you doing this? What did I do to deserve this? He didn't look up, just kept serving himself, his knife scraping the platter. Your choices, Sadie. He said, his tone flat, like he was stating a fact. They're not what I built this family for. My breath caught a sharp pain blooming in my chest. Choices. He meant my dream, my years of coding late into the night, my pitches to investors who doubted a woman could lead in tech. That was what he couldn't forgive. Lorraine leaned forward, her bracelet clinking again. Oh, honey, she said, don't take it personally. It's just business. Business. As if my life, my future could be reduced to a ledger entry. I wanted to scream, to upend the table, to make them feel the weight of what they'd done. But all I could do was sit there, my heart pounding as the room spun and the truth settled in the family I'd trusted was slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. I sat frozen. Dad's words slicing deeper than I thought possible. The dining room felt like a courtroom, and I was on trial for daring to dream. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out the clatter of silverware. I wanted to push back to make him see me, but his eyes were locked on his plate, as if I'd already been dismissed. Lorraine's fake sympathy hung in the air, her words about business still stinging. I glanced at Marcus, his jaw tight, his hand still on my knee. He was my anchor, but even he couldn't pull me out of this quicksand. I forced myself to breathe, to find something to hold on to. The tablecloth soft under my fingers was one Mom had picked out years ago, cream with tiny blue flowers. She'd loved setting this table for holidays, her laugh filling the room as she arranged every detail. If she were here, she'd have fought for me, called Dad out for this betrayal. But she wasn't, and the emptiness of that truth clawed at my chest. Nathan shifted again, his napkin twisted in his hands. I waited for him to say something, anything, to bridge the gap between us. Growing up, he'd been the one to sneak me out for late-night drives, when I couldn't sleep, the one who'd listened when I rambled about my tech ideas. Now he was a stranger, his loyalty split. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. Dad's just trying to protect the family, Sadie. You know how he is. Protect the family. The words hit like a punch. Protect who? Not me. Not the daughter who'd spent years proving herself, who'd turned down safe jobs to build something real. I opened my mouth to argue, but Lorraine cut in, her voice sharp, now no pretense of kindness. Let's be honest, Sadie, your little tech thing is a fantasy. You're throwing away everything your father worked for. Her words were venom, each one aimed to wound. She leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping the table, a rhythm that felt like a countdown to my defeat. I wanted to scream that my startup wasn't a fantasy, that I'd spent countless nights debugging code, pitching to skeptical investors, proving I belonged in rooms where I was the only woman. But the weight of their judgment pressed down, making my voice feel small. Marcus squeezed my knee harder, a silent plea to stay calm, but my blood was boiling. I looked at Clara, hoping for a spark of connection. She was still glued to her phone, her thumbs moving furiously, as if this moment didn't matter. Her indifference was a blade of its own, cutting deeper than Lorraine's words. I stood my chair, scraping against the hardwood floor, the sound jarring in the tense silence. I needed air, needed to escape the suffocating weight of this room. I'm going to the kitchen, I muttered, not waiting for permission. My legs felt unsteady as I walked the hallway, stretching longer than I remembered. The walls were lined with old family photos, moments of a life that felt like someone else's now. Me and Clara building a snowman, Nathan teaching me to ride a bike. Where had that family gone? In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, the cold granite grounding me. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run over my wrists, a trick Mom taught me to calm my nerves. The clock above the sink ticked steadily each second, a reminder that I was losing something I couldn't name. I thought of Dad's study again, not the warm memory from before, but a later one after Mom's funeral. I'd found him there, staring at her photo, his face hollow. I'd promised myself I'd make him proud, that I'd carry Mom's strength. Had that meant nothing to him? I dried my hands, my resolve hardening. I wasn't the naive girl who'd sorted his files, trusting every word he said. I'd built something real, something he couldn't take away. But the hurt still gnawed at me, a question I couldn't shake. Why was I the one he chose to cast aside? I walked back to the dining room, my steps heavier now, determined to face him. But as I reached the doorway, Dad's voice stopped me cold, his tone harder than before. "We're not done, Sadie. Sit down. There's more you need to hear." I stepped back into the dining room, my pulse thudding like a drum in my chest. Dad's command to sit hung heavy, his voice sharper than the knife he now held slicing into the roast. The candles flickered their glow, dimming, as if the room itself sensed the storm brewing. I slid into my chair, the wood creaking under me, and locked eyes with Marcus. His nod was subtle, a quiet promise he had my back, but it couldn't dull the dread coiling in my stomach. Dad set his knife down, the clink against the platter deliberate. He leaned forward, his glasses catching the light, making his eyes look colder, distant. "Sadie," he said, his tone measured, like he was delivering a verdict. "I've decided to redirect your share of the trust. Nathan's law firm needs stability, and Clara's art school fund is a priority. You've chosen a path that doesn't align with this family's legacy." The words landed like a blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My share, the safety net Mom had helped build, was being torn away to prop up Nathan's career and Clara's dreams. I gripped the tablecloth, the fabric bunching under my fingers as a wave of anger surged through me. Legacy? What legacy? The one where he dismissed everything I'd worked for? I'd spent years grinding, pitching my startup to rooms full of suits, who smirked at a woman daring to lead in tech, and now he was calling it a misstep. I opened my mouth to argue, but Dad raised a hand, silencing me. "Your startup, Sadie, it's a gamble," he said, his voice low, final. "You're throwing away what I built for this family. A gamble." The word burned, reducing my sleepless nights, my coded algorithms, my small victories to a reckless bet. I wanted to scream that I'd already secured investors, that my company was real, but his certainty choked my words. Lorraine chimed in, her voice smooth as silk, but laced with venom. "Really, dear, you should consider something stable. Teaching, maybe. It's more your speed." Her lips curved a smile that screamed she'd won. Teaching. As if my ambition was a childish phase, something to be tucked away for her convenience. My face flushed, heat creeping up my neck. I wasn't just fighting Dad now. Lorraine was twisting the knife, her smugness a reminder of every time she'd belittled me since she'd entered our lives. Nathan shifted his fork, scraping his plate, the sound grating against the silence. I looked at him, desperate for him to speak up, to be the brother who'd once had my back. He cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. "Dad's got a point, Sadie. The family needs stability." His words were soft, but they cut deep, a betrayal wrapped in cowardice. Stability. He was parroting Dad, too afraid to challenge him. I searched his face for the Nathan who'd snuck me into his college parties, who'd cheered my first coding project. That brother was gone, replaced by someone bowing to Dad's control. My eyes flicked to the table's centerpiece, Dad's old pocket watch, a gift from Mom before she passed. It sat there, ticking softly, a relic of the man who'd once valued fairness, who'd taught me to stand tall. That man was nowhere in this room. The watch's hands moved forward, but I felt stuck, trapped in a moment where my worth was being erased. I wanted to grab it, to hurl it across the room, to break something the way Dad was breaking me. Clara stayed silent, her phone now face down on the table, her fingers drumming a restless beat. She wouldn't meet my gaze, her detachment a wall I couldn't breach. Marcus leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine, a reminder I wasn't alone. But even his warmth couldn't stop the anger building inside me, a fire fed by every word Dad and Lorraine threw my way. I pushed back, my voice shaking, but firm. My startup isn't a gamble, Dad. I've got investors, traction, a team that believes in me. You don't get to decide what my legacy is. The words felt good, like reclaiming a piece of myself, but Dad's expression didn't waver. He leaned back, folding his arms, his silence louder than any rebuttal. Lorraine smirked, sipping her wine again, her bracelet glinting like a taunt. Nathan looked away, his guilt palpable but useless. The room grew heavier, the air thick with unspoken truths. I felt the weight of Mom's absence more than ever, her fairness a ghost in this house, now ruled by control and resentment. Dad's decision wasn't just about money. It was a rejection of who I was, who I'd fought to become. And as I sat there, staring into his unyielding eyes, I knew this wasn't the end of his verdict. There was more coming, and it would hurt worse. The silence after my outburst stretched thin like a thread ready to snap. Dad's folded arms stayed rigid, his face a mask of disapproval, as if my defense was an inconvenience. Lorraine's smirk widened, her wine glass tilting in her hand, the red liquid catching the candlelight like blood. My chest ached, a dull throb that spread with every breath. I wanted to stand, to walk out, but my legs felt bolted to the chair, trapped by the weight of their judgment. Clara finally looked up, her eyes narrowing as she tossed her phone onto the table with a soft thud. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet. You always do this, Sadie, making everything about you and your big dreams. The accusation stung raw and unexpected, like a slap from someone I'd thought was neutral. Always, I'd spent years cheering her art, driving her to galleries, even when Dad scoffed at her hobby. Now she was turning on me, her words laced with a bitterness I hadn't seen coming. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Clara, that's not fair, I said, my voice cracking. I've always supported you. She rolled her eyes, leaning back, her arms crossed like a mirror of Dad's. Supported me? You're just loud, Sadie, always needing attention. Her words were a blade twisting deeper because they came from her. My little sister, the one I'd tucked in during thunderstorms, the one I'd promised to protect after Mom died. Marcus stiffened beside me, his hand twitching on my knee, ready to jump in, but I shook my head slightly. This was my fight, even if it was tearing me apart. I looked to Nathan, hoping for a lifeline, but he was staring at his hands, his knuckles white around his napkin. His silence was louder than Clara's attack, a confirmation that he'd chosen Dad's side, or at least chosen not to fight. The brother who'd once carried me on his shoulders was letting me drown. Lorraine seized the moment, her voice dripping with false concern. Oh, Clara's right, Sadie. You've always been so dramatic. It's exhausting for the rest of us. She glanced at Dad, her eyes gleaming with triumph, as if she'd orchestrated this pile-on. My stomach churned, nausea rising at her manipulation. I wanted to call her out, to expose how she'd slithered into our family, turning Dad against me. But my words felt stuck, drowned by the weight of their collective disdain. Dad cleared his throat, drawing every eye back to him. His voice was low, deliberate, like he was closing a case. I didn't make this decision alone, Sadie. I consulted Lorraine's lawyer to ensure the trust's amendments were airtight. The revelation hit like a brick, my breath catching. Lorraine's lawyer. Not even our family's attorney, but someone tied to her, someone who'd never met me, never seen my worth. Dad had outsourced his betrayal, letting an outsider rewrite my future while I was left in the dark. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a rage so fierce it felt like fire in my veins. I thought of Mom, how she'd balanced Dad's ambition with her warmth, how she'd taught me to fight for what I believed in. If she were here, she'd have torn through this farce, demanded fairness. But she was gone, and Dad had replaced her with Lorraine, a woman who saw me as a threat to her control. The dining room felt like a tomb, the walls lined with memories of a family that no longer existed. I tried to speak to challenge the lawyer's involvement, but Dad cut me off, his hand slicing the air. "Enough, Sadie. This is final." His tone was steel unyielding, the same one he'd used in courtrooms to shut down arguments. My heart pounded each beat, a reminder of how small he was making me feel, how insignificant. Clara smirked, a flicker of Lorraine's cruelty in her expression, and Nathan's head stayed bowed, his guilt a useless shadow. Marcus leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. "You're enough, Sadie," he whispered, but his words couldn't pierce the fog of pain. I felt like I was sinking, the room spinning as their voices blurred into a hum of condemnation. Every hope I'd had for this dinner, for understanding, for family, was crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. Lorraine's bracelet clinked as she reached for her wine again, a sound that felt like a gavel slamming down. And then, in the suffocating quiet, Dad opened his mouth to speak again, his next words poised to shatter what little I had left. Dad's mouth opened, ready to deliver another blow, but my phone buzzed against the table, a low hum that cut through the suffocating silence. The vibration felt like a lifeline, pulling me from the edge of his words. I glanced at the screen, my assistant Tessa's name glowing. My heart skipped, a mix of dread and instinct urging me to answer. "I'm sorry, I need to take this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, and stood before Dad could object. Lorraine's scoff followed me, sharp and dismissive, as I slipped into the hallway. The air outside the dining room was cooler, the hardwood floor cold under my feet. I pressed the phone to my ear, my back against the wall, the faint smell of lavender from a nearby diffuser grounding me. "Tessa, what's wrong?" I whispered, expecting bad news, something to pile onto this nightmare. Her voice crackled through, bright and breathless. "Sadie, you won't believe this. SoftBank just wired $40 million. The deal's done. You're officially the CEO of a $100 million company." The words hit like a shockwave, my knees buckling as I slid down the wall to the floor. 40 million. CEO. 100 million. Numbers and titles that felt too big, too surreal for the girl sitting in her childhood hallway, surrounded by faded family photos. My breath caught a laugh bubbling up, but it twisted into a sob. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to hold it together. Tessa kept talking, her excitement spilling over details about the wire transfer, the board's approval, but I could barely process it. All I could think was, I did this. Me, despite them. I stared at the wall where a small framed drawing hung, one I'd made for Dad at 10, a clumsy sketch of our house with stick figure us smiling. He'd hung it proudly once, bragging to his friends about his artistic kid. Now it felt like a relic, a reminder of a bond he'd just severed. My chest tightened, joy and pain colliding in a way that made my head spin. I'd built something incredible, something he'd called a gamble, but it didn't erase the sting of his rejection, Lorraine's cruelty, Clara's betrayal, Nathan's silence. Tessa's voice pulled me back. "Sadie, you there? We need you at the office tomorrow to sign off. The press is going to lose it." I nodded, though she couldn't see, and managed a shaky, "I'll be there." I hung up my phone, warm in my hand, and sat there, the hallway stretching long and quiet. The dining room's tension waited just beyond the door, a beast ready to swallow me again. I wanted to stay here to hold on to this moment of triumph, but Dad's voice echoed in my mind, demanding I return. I stood, my legs trembling, and took a slow breath. The lavender scent faded, replaced by the faint smell of roasted meat drifting from the dining room. I tucked my phone into my pocket, my fingers brushing the screen. Tessa's call, still a pulse of truth in my veins. I'd done what they said I couldn't, but walking back into that room felt like stepping into a trap. What would they say if they knew? Would it change anything, or would they twist this too? I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking softly. Every eye turned to me, Dad's stare heavy. Lorraine's lips pursed in annoyance. Clara's fingers hovered over her phone, paused mid-text, and Nathan's gaze flickered up then away. Marcus gave me a questioning look, his eyes searching for a clue. I stood at the threshold, my heart pounding, the weight of Tessa's news burning inside me. Dad's voice cut through, impatient. "Sadie, sit down. We're not finished." I froze at Dad's command, the dining room air thick with expectation. My fingers twitched, still tingling from Tessa's call, the truth of my success, a secret fire in my chest. I didn't sit. I couldn't. The weight of their stares pinned me, but something else surged inside, a reckless need to be seen. I took a breath, my voice low but clear. "Actually, Dad, I just got a call. SoftBank wired $40 million. My startup's now worth $100 million. I'm the CEO." The room went still, a vacuum swallowing sound. Nathan's fork slipped clattering against his plate. Clara's phone hit the table, her mouth open, eyes wide with something like envy. Lorraine's wine glass froze midair, her face draining of color, lips parting in disbelief. Marcus's eyes lit up, a proud smile, breaking through his whisper barely audible. "You did it, Sadie." My heart raced, a mix of triumph and terror as I watched their world tilt. Dad laughed, a harsh barking sound that shattered the silence. "You're lying, Sadie. Stop this nonsense and sit down." His words were a whip meant to drag me back to the girl he could control. He leaned forward, his knuckles white on the table, his certainty a wall I'd never breached. I pulled my phone from my pocket, hands steady despite the tremor inside, and opened Tessa's email. I held it up the screen, glowing with the confirmation, $40 million signed, sealed, delivered. Nathan leaned closer, squinting at the screen, his breath catching. Clara craned her neck, her expression souring, as if my victory was her loss. Lorraine set her glass down hard, the clink echoing, her eyes narrowing to slits. "This is absurd," she hissed, her voice tight. "You're making a fool of yourself, Sadie. Teaching's one thing, but this, you're delusional." Her words were venom, but they lacked the power they'd had before. She was scrambling, and I saw it. Dad's laughter died, his face hardening as he scanned the email. He pushed his glasses up, his jaw tight, but he didn't speak. The silence was worse than his dismissal, a void that sucked the air from my lungs. I'd expected anger, maybe grudging respect, but not this refusal to acknowledge what I'd done. I lowered the phone, my arm heavy, the room spinning as their disbelief pressed against me. Clara broke the quiet, her voice sharp, almost a snarl. "So what, Sadie? You got lucky. Doesn't mean you're better than us." Her words cut, not because they were true, but because they came from her, my sister, who'd once painted my nails and shared my secrets. Nathan looked away, his hands twisting his napkin, his silence a fresh wound. Marcus reached for my hand under the table, his grip warm, but it couldn't shield me from the onslaught. Lorraine leaned toward Dad, her voice a stage whisper, loud enough for all to hear. "She's embarrassing you, Henry. This is why we changed the trust. She's unstable, chasing fantasies." Her accusation was a public execution meant to bury me in shame. I felt the room shrink, their eyes like spotlights exposing every doubt I'd ever had. My success, my proof, was being twisted into a flaw, a reason to cast me out. Dad's gaze met mine, cold and unyielding, his silence louder than any verdict. The candles burned low, wax pooling on the table, a slow bleed of light. My throat burned, my victory hollowed out by their refusal to see me. I stood there, exposed my heart, a raw, beating wound, with no words left to fight the family that had already decided I was nothing. The dining room felt like a battlefield, the air heavy with Dad's silence and Lorraine's venom. My phone, still warm in my hand, was proof of my worth, but their refusal to see it left me hollow. I stood, my legs steadier now, the weight of their judgment shifting into something else, resolve. I looked at Dad, his eyes still cold, and spoke, my voice calm but unyielding. I don't need your trust, Dad. I've built my own legacy, and it's bigger than this table. Lorraine's laugh was sharp, a brittle sound meant to cut. Oh, Sadie, don't be ridiculous. You're playing at something you don't understand. Her words were a reflex, but they lacked the sting they once had. I turned to her, meeting her gaze, my own steady. I'm not playing, Lorraine. I've worked harder than you'll ever know. My startup's real, and it's mine. Her smile faltered just for a moment, and that crack fueled me. I glanced at Clara, her scowl unchanged, and Nathan, his head still bowed. Their betrayal hurt, but I wasn't begging for their approval anymore. I thought of the nights I'd spent coding in my cramped apartment, the rejections from investors who doubted a woman could lead the quiet victories when my app gained traction. That was my truth, not this room's verdict. I straightened my shoulders, squaring, and spoke again, this time to all of them. You can keep your money. I've earned my place, and I'm not asking for your permission to live my life. Dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond, his silence a wall I'd stopped trying to climb. Clara huffed, muttering something under her breath, but I didn't care to hear it. Marcus's hand found mine, his fingers lacing through a silent cheer that warmed me. I turned to him, my voice softer. Let's go, Marcus. I'm done here. His nod was immediate, his eyes proud, and we moved toward the door, the hardwood creaking under our steps. Nathan's voice stopped me low and hesitant. Sadie, wait. I turned, meeting his gaze, the first time he'd looked at me all night. His face was conflicted, his hands twisting the napkin into knots. I'm sorry, he said, barely audible. I didn't know it'd go this far. I saw it then, the weight of Dad's expectations on him, the way he'd been molded to fit a role he didn't want. It softened my anger, but it didn't change my choice. I know, Nathan, I said, my voice gentle but firm. But I can't stay in this. I pushed through the door, the cool hallway air hitting my face like a release. The walls lined with old family photos seemed to watch me go, but I didn't look back. My steps echoed, each one a declaration. I'd spent too long seeking Dad's pride, Lorraine's acceptance, Clara's loyalty. No more. Outside, the Chicago night was crisp, the streetlights casting soft pools on the sidewalk. Marcus slid his arm around me, his warmth a shield against the chill. In the car, I pulled out my phone, my fingers moving before I could overthink. I texted Tessa, my words quick and sure. Let's prep a press release. I want the world to know what we've built. My startup wasn't just a company. It was my answer to every doubt, every dismissal. I leaned back, the leather seat cool against my neck, and felt a spark ignite inside me, a strength I hadn't known I had. This wasn't the end, it was my beginning. Back at our apartment, the city's hum filtered through the open balcony door, a soft counterpoint to the storm still raging inside me. I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop casting shadows across the room. Marcus poured me a glass of water, setting it beside me with a quiet smile. You're unstoppable, you know that, he said, his voice warm, grounding. I nodded, but my focus was on the screen, where Tessa's reply waited, press release draft ready. Need your input. I opened the document, my eyes scanning the words. It wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration of who I was, what I'd built. I added a line about our mission empowering women in tech giving voice to those the world overlooks. Each keystroke felt like carving my name into stone, a permanence Dad couldn't erase. I thought of the women I'd met at conferences, their stories of being dismissed, doubted. This was for them, too. Marcus sat across from me, flipping through my old notebook, its pages filled with startup sketches and scribbled ideas. He held up a drawing of our app's first logo, a jagged line forming a rising star. "Remember this?" he asked. "You drew it at 3 a.m. Said it was your future." I laughed, the sound surprising me light in the heavy night. I'd forgotten that moment, but it reminded me how far I'd come, how many times I'd refused to quit. I turned back to the laptop, my fingers pausing. I opened a new document and started a letter to Dad, the words spilling out raw and unfiltered. "You taught me to dream big," I wrote, "but you couldn't see mine. I'm not your failure. I'm my own success." I didn't plan to send it, not yet, but writing it felt like shedding a weight, like reclaiming the girl who'd believed in his promises. The cursor blinked steady as my heart beat, and I saved the file, naming it simply Truth. My phone buzzed a message from my lawyer, Andrea. "Trust amendments are locked, but your assets are secure. Call if you need me to push back." I exhaled relief, mixing with a new clarity. Dad's money was his weapon, but I didn't need it. My startup was my shield, my sword built from years of grit and faith. I texted Andrea back. "Thanks. I'm good for now." The words felt true, a quiet victory in themselves. I stood stretching and walked to the balcony. The Chicago skyline glittered, each light a story, a struggle, a triumph. I thought of Mom, how she'd stand out here during summer nights, her hair catching the breeze as she told me to chase what scared me. I'd done that, and it had led me here to a life I'd forged without Dad's approval. The thought didn't erase the hurt, but it dulled its edge, made it bearable. Marcus joined me, his arm slipping around my waist. "What's next, CEO?" He asked, his tone teasing but proud. I leaned into him, my eyes on the horizon. "A team meeting," I said. "I want them to hear it from me, to know what we've done." My voice was calm, but inside a fire burned steady and sure. I wasn't just Sadie anymore, the daughter who'd lost her place. I was a leader, and I was ready to claim it. I turned back to the desk, my gaze falling on a small wooden box Mom had given me carved with tiny sparrows. I opened it, revealing a single key, one she'd said would unlock my future. I hadn't understood then, but now I did. I closed the box, my fingers lingering on the wood, and sat back down. The night stretched ahead, full of work of purpose. I began typing again, my eyes clear, my heart steady, ready to build what was mine. The morning after the press release, my office in downtown Chicago buzzed with a new energy. Glass walls reflected the sunrise, painting the room in shades of gold. My team huddled around laptops, their chatter a mix of excitement and urgency as the news spread. Our startup was trending, hashtags popping up across social media, strangers calling me a trailblazer. I stood by the window, coffee mug warm in my hands, watching the city wake. The world was noticing, but the silence from my family was louder. My phone lit up with a notification, a snide email from Lorraine. "Your little stunt humiliated your father, Sadie. Have some respect." Her words were sharp, meant to wound, but they felt hollow like a wasp without a sting. I deleted it, my thumb steady, and turned back to the room. Tessa was on the phone fielding investor calls, her notepad scribbled with names of firms I'd only dreamed of pitching to. The $40 million from SoftBank had opened doors, but it was my team's faith that kept me standing. I sat at my desk, a sleek metal frame cluttered with sticky notes and a potted succulent Marcus had given me. My laptop pinged with a text from Nathan. "Can we talk? I'm sorry about last night. I want to explain." His words stirred a flicker of hope, but also caution. I'd seen his guilt at dinner, but apologies didn't undo silence. I typed back, "Coffee tomorrow noon," and set the phone down. My mind drifting to Mom. She'd always said family was worth fighting for, but what if they didn't fight back? I left the office early, needing air, and drove to the cemetery where Mom was buried. The gravel path crunched under my shoes, the air sharp with the scent of cut grass. Her headstone was simple, etched with her name, and a line about love enduring. I knelt, brushing away a stray leaf, and spoke softly as if she could hear. "I did it, Mom. They don't see it, but I do." The words felt like a confession, a way to anchor myself in her strength. I stayed until the sun dipped low, the quiet wrapping around me like her old shawl. Back home, my phone buzzed again, this time Clara. Her message was curt, demanding I call her something about needing to share the spotlight. Her tone was all edges, no warmth, and it hit me how much she'd changed, or maybe how much I'd missed. I didn't reply, not yet. The weight of her envy, Lorraine's spite, Nathan's regret, it was all piling up, a storm I hadn't expected after my stand. I set the phone face down on the counter, the marble cool against my palms, and stared out at the skyline. Success was mine, but it came with a shadow, one that felt heavier than I'd imagined. The next day, I sat across from Nathan at a small cafe, the smell of roasted beans thick in the air. The wooden table between us was scratched, etched with years of strangers' initials, a map of lives that had crossed here. Nathan's coffee sat untouched, steam curling upward, his fingers tapping the mug's handle. He looked older, lines creasing his forehead, his eyes heavy with something unspoken. I waited my own cup, cooling the hum of the cafe, fading into a tense quiet. He finally spoke, his voice low, almost swallowed by the clink of dishes. "Dad's been different since Mom, Sadie. Lorraine's got him believing he's protecting us by controlling everything." He paused, glancing at the window where rain streaked the glass in slow, deliberate lines. I didn't know he'd go this far with the trust. I should have said something. His admission hung there fragile, but it didn't erase the sting of his silence at dinner. I knotted my lips tight, unsure if I could trust him again. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness sharp on my tongue. "What changed, Nathan?" "Why tell me now?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. He shifted his chair, creaking, and looked at me. Really looked for the first time since that night. "Your press release," he said. "I saw it online, saw what you've built. It made me realize I'm stuck doing what Dad wants, not what I believe in." His honesty disarmed me, but it also ached, a reminder of the family we'd lost. Later, I opened my laptop at home, the screen's glow harsh against the dim living room. Clara had texted again, her words sharper. "Call me Sadie. Stop acting like you're above us." I ignored it, my focus on an email from my lawyer, Andrea. "The trust is finalized," she wrote. "No legal recourse, but your startup's safe." I exhaled, the finality settling like dust. Dad's choice was permanent, a door slammed shut, but my company was untouchable, a truth I clung to. I stood to speak at a tech conference that evening, my heels clicking on the polished stage. The crowd was a sea of faces, their applause warm but distant. I shared my journey, the rejections, the nights I doubted myself, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. When I mentioned the SoftBank deal, the room erupted, but I felt a pang knowing my family wasn't among them. As I stepped off stage, a woman in the front row, her badge reading CTO, mouthed, "Thank you." Her eyes held a story like mine, and for a moment, I felt less alone. Back home, I found a new post on social media, Lorraine's name attached. A photo of her and Dad at a charity gala, her caption, "A veiled jab, some chase fame, others build quietly." My stomach twisted, her words a public dismissal of my work. I closed the app, my hands trembling, and sat on the couch, the fabric soft under my fingers. The room was quiet, the city's pulse faint beyond the windows. I'd won the world's attention, but my family's rejection was a shadow that grew heavier, a weight I couldn't shake, pulling me into a stillness that felt like falling. The evening sun dipped low, painting my apartment balcony in hues of amber and rose. I leaned against the railing, the metal cool under my palms, and watched Chicago's skyline settle into dusk. The city's pulse was steady, a rhythm I'd grown to love, but tonight it felt like a quiet companion listening as I sorted through the pieces of myself. My startup success was real, undeniable, yet the ache of my family's distance lingered softer now, like a bruise fading, but not gone. Inside, I'd set the table for my team, a simple spread of pasta and salad, the kind of meal that invited laughter. Their voices filled the room, a warm hum as they swapped stories of late-night coding sessions and early wins. I stood at the counter, slicing bread, the knife's rhythm calming. This was my chosen family, people who saw me, not the daughter who'd failed to fit Dad's mold. I caught Tessa's eye, her grin wide, as she recounted a client's praise, and felt a swell of pride, not just for me, but for us. Marcus moved beside me, his sleeve brushing mine as he arranged glasses. He'd suggested this dinner, a way to celebrate without the glare of press or investors. "You're building something bigger than you know," he said. His voice low, meant only for me. I smiled, the words settling deep, a reminder of why I'd chosen him, why we'd chosen each other. I handed him a stack of napkins, our fingers touching, and for a moment, the world felt right. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Nathan, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He held up a folder of old family photos, his smile tentative but real. "Found these in Dad's attic," he said. "Thought you might want them." I took the bag, my fingers grazing the rough fabric, and invited him in. He hesitated, then stepped inside his presence, a bridge to a past I was learning to hold gently. We sat on the couch, the team's laughter, a soft backdrop, and flipped through the photos, me with pigtails, Nathan with a skateboard. Mom's eyes bright in every frame. One photo stopped me, a shot of Mom at a picnic, her sundress fluttering, a basket of apples at her feet. I remembered that day, the way she'd taught me to peel fruit with a pocket knife, her hands steady, patient. "You've got her strength," Nathan said, his voice quiet, and I looked at him, seeing not the brother who'd stayed silent, but the one trying to find his way back. I knotted my throat tight and set the photo aside, a piece of her I'd carry forward. Clara arrived late, her art portfolio tucked under her arm, her steps cautious. She hovered by the door, her eyes scanning the room, landing on me. I waved her in, pointing to a chair, and she sat, her fingers fidgeting with the portfolio's strap. I asked about her latest work, my tone light but genuine, and she opened the folder, showing me a sketch of a cityscape, all sharp lines and muted colors. "It's good," I said, pointing out the depth in her shading, and her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. I saw her then, not as the sister who'd lashed out, but as someone searching for her own place, just as I was. I stepped back to the balcony, the night air crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. The team's voices drifted out, a reminder of what I'd built, but my thoughts were on Nathan and Clara, on the fragile threads we were weaving. I ignored a new notification, likely another jab from Lorraine, and let the city's lights hold me instead. My heart was steady, not healed, but healing, and I stood there breathing slow, ready to carry that calm into whatever came next. The night settled deeper, the balconies quiet, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. I stepped back inside, the warmth of the apartment wrapping around me, my team's laughter, now softer, winding down. I cleared the table, stacking plates, the clink of ceramic a gentle rhythm. Marcus brushed past, carrying a tray of empty glasses, his glance a silent check-in. I nodded okay, in a way I hadn't been in weeks, the weight of the dinner's fallout easing, not gone, but bearable. I drove to a community center the next morning, a squat brick building tucked between high-rises, its windows papered with kids' drawings. I'd signed up to teach coding to teens, a promise I'd made to myself after the SoftBank deal. The room smelled of chalk and old books, desks arranged in a loose circle. A girl, Harper, sat at the front, her hoodie frayed, her eyes sharp with curiosity. She asked about building apps, her voice bold despite her nervous fidgeting, and I saw myself in her, the girl who'd once typed code on a second-hand laptop, dreaming beyond her reach. I walked her through a basic program, my hands steady as I pointed to the screen. Her face lit up when the code ran a small victory that felt bigger than any boardroom win. She told me she wanted to be an engineer, her words spilling fast, like she was afraid they'd vanish. I listened, really listened, and told her she could, that she already was. Her grin was a spark, a reminder of why I'd started this, why I kept going. Back home, Nathan texted saying he'd taken a pro bono case, his first step away from Dad's firm. His words were simple, but they carried weight, a sign he was carving his own path. I replied with a quick "proud of you," and meant it, the knot of our past loosening just a bit. Clara sent a sketch later, a pencil drawing of a sparrow in flight, no note attached. I held it up, the lines delicate but sure, and felt a quiet shift, a bridge forming where resentment had been. A letter from Dad arrived in the mail, his handwriting shaky on the envelope. I opened it on the couch, the paper thin between my fingers. He wrote of regret, of missing Mom, but stopped short of an apology, his pride a wall he couldn't cross. I read it twice, then tucked it into a drawer, not ready to forgive, but not needing to carry the anger anymore. His words were his burden now, not mine. I stood to water the plants on my windowsill, their leaves curling toward the light. The city outside was waking a soft gray dawn, breaking over the rooftops. Harper's voice echoed in my mind, her dream a thread connecting me to something larger. I set the watering can down, my hands still, and looked out at the skyline, its edges softened by morning mist. My heart was calm, not whole, but steady, ready to step into the life I'd built, one quiet choice at a time. The morning light spilled through my office window, soft and golden, warming the hardwood floor. I sat at my desk, a mug of tea steaming beside me, and reviewed our latest report. My startup now employed 50 people, mostly women and minorities, each hire a step toward the world I wanted to build. The numbers on the screen were more than revenue. They were proof of a dream that had outgrown the doubts of that dining room. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and let the quiet pride settle in. Outside, Chicago hummed its rhythm steady as my own. I'd started running in the mornings, a new habit born from restless nights. The lakefront path was my sanctuary, the crunch of gravel under my sneakers, a counterpoint to my thoughts. Each step felt like stitching myself back together, not erasing the hurt, but weaving it into something stronger. I'd pass joggers, dog walkers, people starting their day, and feel connected, part of a city that didn't ask me to prove my worth. Back home, I'd taken to journaling, a leather notebook now half filled with thoughts I used to keep locked inside. I wrote about the dinner, Dad's coldness, Lorraine's barbs, but also about Nathan's slow return, Clara's tentative steps toward me. The pages held my anger, my hope, my questions, each word a small release. I'd sit by the window pen, moving the city's skyline, a backdrop to my rebuilding. It wasn't therapy, just a way to make sense of the pieces, to see myself clearly. I visited the community center again, teaching Harper and her classmates. Their questions were fearless, their laughter bright, filling the room with the lightness I craved. Harper showed me a new app idea scribbled on notebook paper, her eyes wide with possibility. I knelt beside her, pointing out ways to refine it, and saw her confidence bloom. Teaching them wasn't just giving back. It was reminding myself why I'd fought so hard, why I'd kept going. At home, I hung Clara's sparrow sketch on my wall, its frame simple but sturdy. It caught the light each morning, a quiet reminder of her effort to mend things. Nathan sent me a link to his legal aid clinic's website, a modest page, but alive with purpose. I clicked through, reading about his work for families who couldn't pay, and felt a warmth. Not forgiveness yet, but a start. Dad's letter stayed in its drawer, untouched for weeks. its weight no longer pulling me under. I walked to the balcony, the evening air cool, carrying the faint scent of street vendors' pretzels. The city stretched out lights twinkling like stars brought low. I thought of Mom, not with the ache of loss, but with gratitude for her courage, her belief in me. I'd carried it even when I didn't know, and it had led me here to a life I'd chosen. I stood still, breathing slow, the past a shadow that no longer covered me, ready to name what I'd learned. A family reunion came a few weeks later, held in a park, under wide oaks, their leaves rustling in the late summer breeze. I arrived with Marcus, a picnic basket swinging between us, the grass soft under my sandals. The air carried the scent of charcoal and blooming clover, a quiet promise of renewal. I spotted Nathan first setting up a folding table, his sleeves rolled up, a rare ease in his posture. Clara was nearby, arranging a tray of fruit, her movements deliberate, like she was testing this new space between us. Dad was there, standing by a grill, his hair grayer than I remembered. He glanced at me, his nod brief. His eyes guarded but softer, lacking the steel of that dinner. I returned the nod, my heart steady, no longer seeking his approval, but open to this moment. We didn't speak much, just a few words about the weather, the food, but it was enough. A step neither of us pushed too far. Lorraine's absence was a relief, her influence a fading echo no longer shaping the air. Clara approached me later, holding a small canvas, its edges wrapped in linen. She handed it over, her voice low. "I made this for you," she said, her eyes meeting mine, unguarded for the first time in years. It was a painting of a single tree, its roots, deep branches, reaching wide, painted in soft greens and golds. I traced the lines with my finger, feeling the texture, and hugged her, our tears mingling. It wasn't forgiveness spelled out, but it was real, a bridge we'd both chosen to cross. Nathan took the microphone as the sun dipped, his voice steady, announcing his legal aid clinic's first case win. The crowd clapped, and I joined in, my hands warm, seeing not just my brother, but a man stepping into his own light. I caught Dad's eye, then his expression unreadable, but not cold, a flicker of something like respect passing through. It wasn't the pride I'd once craved, but it was enough to let me breathe easier. I spoke next, standing on a small platform, the park stretching green around me. I shared Mom's lesson, one she'd whispered during long walks. Love doesn't demand you shrink, it lifts you to grow. I'd learned it the hard way, through rejection, through building my own path. My voice didn't waver, each word a stone laid in a foundation I'd made mine. The crowd listened, their faces soft, and I felt Mom's presence steady as the earth beneath me. Later, I launched our nonprofit at the community center, a program for girls in tech named for Mom. Harper stood beside me, her scholarship certificate clutched tight, her smile wide as she thanked the room. I watched her, my throat tight, knowing this was why I'd fought, why I'd kept going. The center's walls were bright with student art, their colors a testament to dreams taking root, and I felt grounded whole in a way I hadn't expected. As the day ended, I sat on a park bench, the wood worn smooth, and watched a robin hop across the grass, its wings catching the fading light. Mom had loved robins, called them messengers of hope. I smiled, feeling her clothes, her courage woven into every choice I'd made. The lesson was clear now. Family can wound, can break your heart, but your worth isn't theirs to define. It's built in the quiet moments, the steps you take alone, the love you choose to give despite the pain. I'd found mine, not in their approval, but in the life I'd carved, in the people I'd lifted along the way. What's a moment you found your strength when the world said you shouldn't? Share it below. Let's hold space for each other's truths. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here, for listening, for carrying your own light. Here's to healing, to growing, to all the quiet victories ahead.